Our banking system is sound.
In the past 2 weeks, serious difficulties at a small number of banks have emerged.
These banks are safe.
All depositors' savings in the banking system are safe.
The banking system in the United States is sound and resilient.
Banking system is sound. Banking system is sound. Banking system is sound. Banking system is sound and resilient.
A rough week for the banking industry.
The collapse of Silicon Valley Bank, the second biggest bank collapse in U.S. history.
The Silicon Valley Bank collapse is the worst since 2008.
Social Security is structurally sound.
As president, I will not cut one penny from Social Security or Medicare.
There's an imminent disaster waiting. I mean, that's where we're headed.
2 balls, 2 strikes to Bryce Harper. Suarez delivers. Swing and a drive. Left field. It's deep. It's going. Yes! And it is gone. Yes! It is bedlam at the bank as Bryce Harper.
Thank you for tuning in to podcast number 9 of Bogus Banks, Behemoth Bubbles, and Baseball Betting. I'm your host, Chase Goldman, and today is December 5th, Friday, 2025. Just want to start out the podcast and go over a little bit of baseball. I did confirm today that the baseball rules are going to be changing next year. Each team is going to get 2 challenges on balls and strikes. Those challenges are going to have to be initiated by either the batter on offense or the pitcher or the catcher on defense. Now, one thing about that, when you're watching baseball on TV at home and you see that square right above the plate, that's your strike zone. And if any part of the baseball intersects with that line that outlines that strike zone, that's officially going to be a strike in 2026 if the call is challenged. So I would expect a lot more challenges from the pitcher and catcher than we will from the batters. We'll see how it goes, but that's kind of what I'm expecting. Now, it doesn't look like it's going to delay the game by very much at all. It's going to be a 10 to 15 second delay is what they're expecting. They're going to put the little, what we see on TV, they're going to put that up on the Jumbotron. It's going to take about 10 to 15 seconds after the catcher or pitcher or batter requests a challenge. They will request the challenge by immediately pointing to their ball cap. And so how that, or I guess the batter's helmet. So that's how that's going to go. But they're saying they're going to put the image right up on the Jumbotron for the entire stadium to see. It's going to be very instantaneous. It's going to be just like what we see on TV. And it doesn't look like it's going to slow down the game very much at all. But I'm sure looking forward to that. Baseball is going to start early this year. It's going to start on March 25th, 2026. That is less than 4 months away, and I'm looking forward to the start of a new baseball season. If you're new to the podcast, I'll point out that every morning I have a spreadsheet that I've developed. It took me years to develop it. It goes back to the beginning of the 2008 season. I have every baseball game played since 2008, regular season. I have starting pitchers, home and away, batting lines, game scores for all the pitchers. You name the stat, I've got it on my spreadsheet. Win-loss records for both teams, the betting lines, and I've found some tendencies that Vegas tends to make. And so I post all my plays every morning for free at Bogus Banks on Twitter. That's at Bogus Banks, all lowercase. Last year, 2025, we did have a winning season. We won. If you had bet every single play that I posted on Twitter, you won about 31 and a half units. Now, if we could have identified all the late day pitching changes, we would have won, I think, around 44 units. It was much better. It seems like every time there was a pitching change that caused a trigger on my spreadsheet, that was a guaranteed winner. They probably won over 90% in 2025. It was crazy. I don't expect that win percentage to persist, but that's what it did in 2025. So every time we missed a play, it was a winner. But let's move on to the Behemoth Bubble. Now, I'm going to go over this again, and for a lot of you that may have listened to podcast number 6 or 7 or 8, this might be review. But the best way to brainwash someone is repetition, and likewise, the best way to break the spell of brainwashing is also through repetition, because in the mainstream news, pretty much all they ever tell you is how great things are. Blue skies and sunshine as far as the eyes can see, although that has started to change a lot over the last few months. But let's go over my list here real quickly. Year to date, TSA check-ins. Now, I monitor this very closely. Every morning when I get my coffee, I sit down at my desk. That's one of the first things I'll do normally is update TSA check-ins when they come out at 7:30 Central. I believe that would be 8:30 Eastern. That's usually about the time TSA will put those out. And I feel like that's probably the very best barometer of the U.S. economy because it incorporates, vacation and leisure travel as well as business travel. And it's just, I don't know that there's a better pulse on the U.S. economy than TSA check-ins. They are up year to date 0.44% versus, year to date versus 2024. Las Vegas. Now, I feel like that's probably the nation's number one discretionary money spending barometer. They've seen a 7.6% year-over-year drop in visitors versus 2024. That's through October. They're estimating that's 2.6 million fewer visitors to Las Vegas in 2025 than what they saw in the first 10 months of 2024. Challenger job cuts in October were the highest the month of October has seen in 22 years. So, we've got the S&P 500 within probably, just over 0.5% from its all-time high right now. And these are the stats I'm going over. 1 in 20 U.S. households has been sent to collections by their electric company. Overdue balances are up 32% versus 2022. So in 2022, the average overdue electric bill was $597. Today, that number is $789. Subprime auto loan delinquencies are at an all-time high right now. Auto repossessions are also at an all-time high. Credit card rejection rates, I'm sorry, not credit card, but just credit rejection rates are also at all-time highs. Now, that data doesn't go back as far. It only goes back to 2013, but this is an all-time high right now today. Auto loan rejection rates, 15.2%. Mortgage refinancing rejection rates, 45.7%. Credit card limit increase requests, rejection rate, 44.5%. 401k hardship withdrawals. Those are at an all-time high. Now, I want to make sure that's not loans. These are hardship withdrawals. That's the guys that are so broke that they need their money right now. They're willing to pay that extra 10% penalty to IRS to get their hands on their money right now so they can pay their bills. Office commercial real estate delinquencies are at an all-time high. Now, that sounds like, oh, that's no big deal. Every skyscraper that you see on that downtown skyline, whether it's Cincinnati or it's Cleveland or it's Detroit or Dallas, all those skyscrapers nationwide are pretty vacant. They don't have enough tenants in there to make their mortgage payments. These delinquencies are increasing, and they are currently at an all-time high. I expect those to land on some bank balance sheets eventually. Right now, we're still playing the extended pretend game with the banks, but this is going to blow up at some point in the future, I'm certain. Student loan delinquencies are at an all-time high. Unemployment rates for recent college graduates are at an all-time high. It is now normal for college kids that graduate from the university to move back home with mom and dad versus going out and getting their apartments because the cost of living is so high now, and it's very, very hard for them to find jobs right now. They're just at massive unemployment with recent college graduates. All-time high on that. Housing unaffordability is at an all-time high. Residential electric bills at an all-time high. Auto insurance premiums are at an all-time high. Health insurance premiums are also at an all-time high. Corporate bankruptcy filings through October are on pace for the worst year since the great financial crisis of 2008, 2009, 2010. Market concentration risk, 42%. The top 10 stocks in the S&P 500 make up 42% of the entire market cap of the S&P 500. Let me say that again. The top 10 stocks in the S&P 500 make up 42% of the entire market cap of the S&P 500. That is an all-time high by far and away. Credit card debt is at an all-time high, $1.23 trillion Americans owe right now on their credit cards. Margin debt is also $1.2 trillion. Those are the guys that can't just live with the gains they're going to make by putting their money at their trading account and buying stocks. They're margining. They're borrowing money to buy more stocks so they can make even more money. That's at an all-time high. Margin debt, $1.2 trillion. 40 to 45% of the components in the Russell 2000 are unprofitable. And we've got the S&P 500 just inches away from an all-time high. historically, the ratio of insider buying to insider selling hovers somewhere around 3 to 1. In other words, you're always going to have more insider selling than insider buying because insiders just they get free stocks and free options from their employers, and they need to diversify, they need to buy a new boat, they need to make a payment, whatever, they sell. So you've always got that level of selling. But right now, that ratio stands at 5 to 1. The normal ratio is 3 to 1. Right now it's at 5 to 1. For the Mag 7 components, that ratio stands at 14 to 1 over the last few months. CNBC and the mainstream press is now debating whether or not the stock market is in a bubble. Now, I said this on the last podcast, and everything I've said here pretty much is a review for those that listen to podcast number 8. If they're debating whether or not the market is in a bubble, why in the world would you want to be in this market? I promise you, in March of 2009, when the market bottomed after the great financial crisis, there was no one debating whether or not the market was or was not in a bubble. That doesn't happen when the market's dropped as much as it had at that point. So if you're invested in this market, all I can say is think about it. There's no way in the world I would go out and buy into this market right now today. No way. Biggest bubble ever, in my opinion. FreightWaves is reporting that long-haul trucking volumes are down 25% year over year. Michael Burry, he's the guy that Christian Bale played in The Big Short. He has now capitulated and he's closed down his Scion asset management firm. And now he is selling Substack subscriptions. The guy they made a movie about from The Big Short is now selling Substack subscriptions. So that's what it's like trying to be a short seller in these markets today. Those are the logical reasons that I can think of to not want to be invested in this market. Probably not a great thesis to short the market because the bubble can certainly get bigger. But I think the markets have topped, and it's based on what most people would call a conspiracy theory. But before we go any further, I would challenge anybody who wants to say, oh, this guy's a conspiracy theorist. He's crazy Chase Goldman. Go back and please, I beg you, please go back and listen to my podcast number 5, where I detail 20 to 30, maybe 35 different events, big world events, news events that have happened. And by the time they happened, but the thing is they had already been foretold about in books and in movies. They happened in books and movies before they happened in real life. I'm going to give you guys one great example. It's probably my favorite one, and that would be The Eyes of Darkness, written in 1981 by Dean Koontz. Dean Koontz was a famous author back in the 1980s. He wrote a book in 1981, The Eyes of Darkness. It was a book about a worldwide pandemic that was started when a virus escapes from a bioweapons lab. Sound familiar? The bioweapons lab just so happened to be in China. Okay, wow, that's weird. But it wasn't in, Shanghai or anything like that. It was in a town that none of us had heard of before 2020. This bioweapons lab in his book in 1981 was in Wuhan, China. But not only that, this book that he wrote in 1981 was set in the future. Can you guess what year that book was set in? Yeah, that's right. It was set in 2020. And I've got like 20 to 25, maybe 30 examples of that in podcast number 5. And I would encourage anyone who's listening to this podcast to pause right now, go listen to that one, and then come back and listen to the rest of this one. So let's get into the conspiracy trade. It was probably October the 29th, maybe the 30th, maybe even the 28th. I saw something on Twitter about Andrew Ross Sorkin ringing the opening bell of the New York Stock Exchange. He rang the bell on October the 28th, the opening bell, standing in front of a huge, massive sign about a stock market crash. Now, to be clear, Andrew Ross Sorkin wrote a book about the 1929 stock market crash, and he was promoting his book. That's the story they're giving us. And that's why he was ringing the bell on the New York Stock Exchange. Now, first of all, I want to point out there's an old saying in the investment world, nobody rings a bell. So in other words, when markets are at a top, nobody rings a bell to let you know this is the top. I think they literally rang a bell for us on October the 28th. But you got to be able to see it, and I think I see it. And we're going to find out in the next week which way these markets go. But let me go on to this explanation about this trade. He rings the bell on the 28th in front of a giant sign about a stock market crash from 1929. The next day, October the 29th, 2025, this was 5.5 weeks ago, the S&P 500 hit its all-time record intraday high, 6,920. That high has held for 5.5 weeks, 26 trading days. And today it came very, very close. We're going to go over that later. But I got to go back and I just have to teach you guys or show you guys what I think I'm seeing here. So he's standing in front of this sign about a stock market crash. And that stock market crash was in October of 1929. That is a 10/29. The following day was October the 29th. That was the day the S&P 500 hit its all-time intraday high, 10/29. Do I think that's a coincidence? No, I do not. And let's go back. Let's go further back. Let's go back to the dot-com bubble. When that thing crashed, if we had to pick one poster child for the dot-com stock market crash, what company would it be? Would it be Global Crossing? Would it be WorldCom? No. Your poster child for the dot-com stock market crash absolutely was Enron. And so when Enron went bankrupt and they had to kick them out of the S&P 500, who did they choose to replace them? NVIDIA, which is now the world's largest company by market cap. It's the world's largest company. That company is worth more than all the stocks on the Japanese stock market. You could either buy all the stocks, Fujitsu, Nissan, Toyota, you could buy all of those companies over there in Japan and own them all. Or you could own one company called NVIDIA. It's the world's largest company, and it just so happens to be the company that everybody is talking about with this round tripping of revenue, and it's also the company that replaced Enron, who was also doing round tripping of revenue. Okay, so coincidence? I don't think so. I think this shit was all planned. I really do. I know that sounds crazy. Please go back and listen to my podcast number 5. Some of these things go back over 100 years of Barron Trump and stuff like that. But let's keep going. So he rings the bell, standing in front of a giant stock market crash sign on October 28th. The following day was the 29th. The stock market crashed in October of 29. That's at 10/29, and stocks peak on 10/29. That 6,920 intraday high from October 29th is still the all-time high on the S&P 500, although we are very, very close to a new high as of today's close. But let's keep going. I wake up real early one morning. I just flew back from Puerto Rico to my home in Dallas, and woke up really early one morning, and I was curious to see if CNBC would even have programming on that early in the morning. So I grabbed my iPad and opened up Fubo, and sure enough, Andrew Ross Sorkin and Joe Kernan are on the set live on CNBC, and they have a guest, and the guest is promoting a book. And the guest, his name is Oz Perlman. He's from Israel, and he calls himself a mentalist, but most people call him a magician. I would also call him a sorcerer or a wizard. So he's on the set, and he says, what if you knew the future before it happened? What if you knew that October 24th, 1929 was the day the market would crash? What would you do? And Joe Sorkin says, well, of course I'd short the market and I'd make a lot of money. And then he goes, I always like to say that, if we knew the future, I forget exactly what he said, but he says, he points to Joe Kernan basically, and he says, pick a year, any year in the next 10. And so Kernan says, okay, 2027. And then he turns over to Andrew Ross Sorkin and he says, pick a date. He says July 6th. So then he grabs a poster board and he grabs a marker and he writes down 7/06/27. And then what he does is he hands a copy of the 1929 stock market crash book, the book that Sorkin rang the opening bell about. He hands that book to Andrew Ross Sorkin, and he hands the book that he's promoting, Oz Perlman's book, to Joe Kernan. He says, now what I want you to do is each of you open up your book, thumb through it, and find the page that is calling your name, and hold it close to your body. So they both open up the book, and decide on a page, and then they hold it up to their chest. He says, now what I want you to do, Andrew, is look at the first word on your page, remember it, and close the book. And Joe Kernan, I want you to look at the last word on your page, remember it, and close your book. Okay? So I've been thinking a lot about this over the last week or so. There's always been this one thing in the Bible that I've never been able to even come close to understanding, and I think I might have figured it out this week. There was this verse where Jesus said, the first shall be last, and the last shall be first. I think he was talking about the future from his day, 2,000 years ago. And I think what he was trying to say was that witchcraft and Satanism were going to be very prevalent on the earth in the future. And I think that's where we're at today. If you go to any chatbot, you can just ask it, are 9s and 1s important in witchcraft? And it will tell you yes, these are very important numbers to the witches. That's, most people probably don't know that, but they are. And if you look at the major world events that have happened in our lifetimes, 9/11, COVID-19, they both included those numbers, 9 and 1. 9 represents completion or endings of an era. 1 represents new beginnings or the beginning of a new era. So first and last. And so there we have Oz Perlman on the set making a big deal about the first and the last. So he goes back to Andrew Ross Sorkin, and he says, now, I'm going to count down from 3, and because you've already done the first and the last, he brings that up again. He says, I want you to pick a letter from the middle of your word. He says 3, 2, 1, and they both say G at exactly the same time. Okay, they both look at each other, and they're really puzzled. And then he says, now what I want you to do is he hands them each a poster board and a marker. He says, I want you to write down your word, but don't let the other guy see it. So they both write down their word, and then they flip them around, and both of the words on their poster boards are legal. So then he takes his poster board that he had written down earlier, where he wrote down 7/06/27. He turns that upside down. And remember, in witchcraft, that's part of this whole 9/1 thing, 9/11, 9/11, 9/1 thing. In witchcraft, it's very, very important for the Satan. Remember, Ozzy Osbourne always had his upside down crosses. They like to invert things. They like to, reverse things. So there's a lot of Remember back in the 80s, we heard about backward masking, where if you played some of these rock star music songs backwards, you would hear satanic lyrics. I believe that was probably true. But anyway, he turns his sign upside down. The 7/06/27, he turns it upside down, and it reads legal. So now you've got 3 guys holding poster boards up there on the set of CNBC, and all 3 of them say legal. Now, I thought maybe that was going to be some sort of bail-ins, but the more I've thought about it, I think what they're probably going to come up with, maybe another theory on this, would be that all around tripping, it's actually not, they're not breaking any laws. It's still legal because they're just doing vendor financing. That's how you could also label it. Even though, by the way, I just want to say right now, I'm going to post a link to this. When I post this on Twitter, at Bogus Banks on Twitter, underneath this YouTube video that I'm going to put on Twitter, after I finish recording this podcast, I'm going to also put a link to Jack Gamble's podcast from today. He did a 1-hour presentation on the AI bubble and all around tripping. And it is absolutely mind-blowing, and I would encourage anyone listening to this to take the time to spend an hour listening to that one because it's fascinating. And he does a really good presentation on that. He's at Nobody Special Finance. I don't know what his Twitter is, but on YouTube, he is Nobody Special Finance. He does a live podcast every morning, and a half hour before the market opens. And he's really, really sharp. So anyway, that's where we were with the trade. And so I've kind of been adding in my trade a little bit. Now, the NASDAQ I shorted the NASDAQ and not the S&P 500 because what I'm reading into all of this is the market topped on October 29th, 2025. The bottom of the market is going to be July 6th, 2027. That's what I think. Now, that I could be totally reading this wrong, totally reading it wrong. But in light of the fact that that high in the S&P 500 has persisted for 26 trading days, 5.5 weeks. Today I thought it was going to go. Today the S&P 500 ran up within just inches of that all-time high. But here's what's interesting. Remember how we've talked about 1s and 9s being so important to the witches? 1s being the beginnings, 9s being the ends, first and last. The S&P 500 has 3 major ETFs, but the one that everybody knows the most because it's been around the longest, is the SPY ETF. I looked at Yahoo Finance today, and would you believe that the SPY ETF came within 0.19% of its all-time high today. The intraday high today on the SPY was 0.19% of the all-time high set on October 29th, 2025. So is that another coincidence? We've got NVIDIA replacing Enron. We've got 1029. Now we've got a witch. Oh, and by the way, the morning that I woke up and he was doing his little skit on CNBC, what day was it? Remember, 9/11, and the casting of the spell went way back before that happened. And please listen to podcast number 5 to get more details on that. And then COVID-19, the 2 biggest world events of our lifetimes, 9/11, COVID-19, both had those 2 numbers in them, 9 and 1, both of them. And then this witch is up there on CNBC that morning, casting his spell, doing his magic trick. And what was the date? It was 11/18, which encodes 9/11, because you add the 1 and the 8 and you get a 9. So you got an 11 for November, and you got 1 plus 8 for the 18th. That's a 9, and there we have another encoded 9/11. There's the 9 and the 1 showing up again. So is it all just a big coincidence? We'll find out next week. If the market moves on to new highs, I've completely misread this thing, and you guys can just laugh at me and I'll have egg on my face. But as for now, I've survived 26 trading days, and this thing is still on. Now this morning, when we were about 0.5% below the all-time high, I pushed all my chips on the table. I shorted more NASDAQ, and I did merit with calls, but I went all in on this short position. So I'm massively short. My collateral on this trade is my gold mining stocks. So if gold has a bad day Monday, I might have to trim back. I'm not going to end this trade until we hit a new all-time high in the S&P 500. It has to get to 6,921 before I close this trade. But I'm on this trade right now. I still think I've seen something. It might just be a coincidence. I don't think it is. I think there's too much shit going on here. But I could be wrong. I don't know. We'll see. We'll see what happens on Monday and next week. But I'm betting these markets are going to go lower. But if they were able to run these markets up to within 0.19% of the all-time high without breaching that all-time high, what does that tell us? Well, it tells me that these markets are just a fake. They're literally a video game, the number on a screen. So that's where I'm at. Maybe the markets are real. Maybe I'll be wrong next week. Maybe I've just misread everything. But we will find out next week. But the last thing I wanted to go over with you guys real quickly towards the end of the podcast here was the inflation report. So the government came out with their official number today. It's the number that the Fed likes to use the most. They call it the PCE index. But what they're telling us, their official story is that consumer price inflation has run at 2.8% year over year. Now, let me tell you how I've done this. So, I have 2 homes. I have one in Puerto Rico and I have one in Texas. So around October 1st of 2024, a year ago, I went over to the Walmart near my house in Puerto Rico, and I found 40 random items, and I photographed them along with their price tags, and I recorded them on a spreadsheet. And then I came back home to my home in Texas, and around December 1st, I did it again with the Walmart near my house in Texas. I went over there and recorded the prices of 40 random items, mostly groceries. I'd say probably 60% groceries, maybe 65% groceries, and 35% just consumer goods, imported primarily goods. Although not all of them were. Like I think I put WD-40 on one of them. That's not an imported good, I don't think. Anyway, October 1st, I did this in Puerto Rico. I was curious. I remember I went back probably around the middle of summer. I'm going to guess it was probably about 9 months in, around July 1st. And I went through the store and I was walking around and I didn't look up all 40 items, but I probably found about 25 of them. And the prices at that time on July 1st were pretty much unchanged. I mean, I was not seeing hardly any price increases on the things I was looking at. So I did go back on the 1-year anniversary around October 1st, and they remodeled the store. I was not able to find all 40 of the items that I had recorded a year prior, but I was able to find 35 of them, and the average price increase on those 35 items was 3.7%. So then I flew back home to Texas, and on Monday of this week, December 1st, I went into the Walmart near my home in Texas, and I was able to find all 40 products that I had recorded the prices of a year earlier, and the average price increase on those 40 items clocked in at 9.1%. So in July, I was seeing basically nothing. Around October 1st, I was seeing 3.7, and now I'm seeing 9. So what could explain that? It could. Now, I think the official rate of inflation in Puerto Rico is lower than it is in Texas, so that explains some of it. But I'm also wondering if it could be this bullshit story they've given us about the Cayman Islands. Back in mid-October, the Federal Reserve conducted an internal study of some sort. Oh, and they found out that they had underreported or I guess maybe the Treasury does their tick report, which bottom line is it was believed that the Cayman Islands held $400 billion of the U.S. Treasuries. And in mid-October, the Federal Reserve came up with this study, and they had determined that the true holdings of U.S. Treasuries as of the end of 2024, that would be 12/31/24, was closer to $1.85 trillion. So my conspiracy theory is that they funneled all that money over to those Cayman Island hedge funds, and basically instead of expanding the Fed's balance sheet, they really did. The Fed bought it all, but they bought it through the Caymans. So the Caymans bought it all, but I think that's what happened. They printed the money out of thin air, in other words. And that's why, and remember when they printed up all the money in the CARES Act in early 2020, it was about a year and a half later before we really started to see consumer price increases start taking off. It takes some time for that stuff to work through the system. So that's kind of my leading theory on that. But coming in with an average price increase at Walmart of 9.1% on 40 random items, that's a lot. And that's a lot of inflation. And so the middle class, they can't afford another round of inflation, another wave of inflation like they've already been through. This first wave of inflation pretty much destroyed the poor and the lower middle class. And so the middle class and the upper middle class and then the upper class, they just probably, the way I've got this figured is they probably just, instead of cutting back on their standard of living, they probably just cut back on the amount of money they were saving for a rainy day or for retirement. But that's going to have to go to the wayside with another wave of inflation. And, you know, I did hear another podcast this week by Heresy Financial, and he had pretty much picked apart this story that, you know, for a married couple with 2 young children in like, you know, preschool, the poverty line is now $140,000. By the time you factor in health insurance, he figured $2,000 a month on rent. You figure in groceries, you got to have transportation, electric bills, health insurance was a big one, and the daycare for the 2 children was a big one. But bottom line is, you add it all up, if you're making under $140,000, you're pretty much living in poverty. So that's it for today's podcast. I'm going to wrap it up. We'll be back with podcast number 10, and thank you for listening.